Okay, and let's just keep going because you were talking. What you just said, I found very interesting because it kind of touches on a bunch of stuff. Is that you mentioned that you would go live into these, difficult areas and do what you can, and then
Yeah.
you see how it just ends up just still going sideways, and you can't really fix anything, quote unquote. But mostly that just this kind of, I call this a sort of inertia, like a social inertia, is that it's like one rotten apple in the basket makes another rotten apple, and so on, and sooner or later you've got no good apples left. And it's a little bit exaggerated, maybe it's a little bit too black and white for reality, but in many cases I think it's true. And maybe that's something that you could share your thoughts on a little bit, just like living in these difficult neighborhoods in South Africa and trying to help, what that's like.
Yeah, sure. Where it started when I got out of the life, um, there was a short period where I was trying to figure out what I should be doing next, and so forth. Um, and via a church that I was at that stage, they asked whether I could go visit one of these communities. It was Elandspoort Danville. It's on the western side of Pretoria, which is now called Tshwane in Gauteng. And when I got there, obviously saw there was some need, number one, so there's definitely work to do. But the question was how to actually sort of get involved in a sensible manner. And we found a organization back in that time. It was called Cohen, and they would train up guys to go and work full time within school environments. So they would place you in a school. So I went to see them and I said, "Listen, guys, I really want to work in that specific community. There is a school. Can you train me up and put me there?" And they said, "Sure, they'll do that." And that school's name was Kwaggasrand Voorberoep School, which is a school for learners with special educational needs. And I went to work there, and about 6 months in, I realized trying to be effective as an outsider wasn't really a sensible strategy, because for a couple of reasons. Number one, my only contact with those types of communities was on the criminal side, so I didn't really have a good understanding of how to just sort of be within that space as a regular citizen, or a law-abiding citizen at least. And then also, you're always the outsider. They want to
Yeah.
know where you're from, and then they hear, okay, oh, you're coming from there. Oh, it's a Rijkman, meaning you've got money, and oh, what are we? Are we a charity case? And get sort of a lot of pushback from that. So about 6 months in, I found a guy there that was willing to lease me his garage, and I went to go and stay in his garage. I literally lived in his garage, and I took 3 doors and I put hinges on the doors, and I made a room divider. So I had a little front part and a little back part with my bed and my desk, and then basically just sort of systematically started getting involved in the community. And I think I cut my teeth there, because there was a lot of learning in terms of how to get involved. The fact that I was involved in the school was quite sensible, because I would pick up cases, problem cases from children that I started to get to know, that started to trust me. And then also what I did is I would sort of go and find, we call them NGOs, not non-government organizations, so non-profit organizations that
Yeah.
work with welfare and things like that. So I went to find a couple of them, and I committed to one which would feed kids after school 5 days a week. So I would just go and hang out there 3 days a week. And then the other thing I did is I would just walk around there, specifically at night, and just go and find whatever we can find. I'm saying we because I had this one buddy on Friday nights. He would join me with it, and so it was quite a proactive thing of just sort of digging into the community and trying to find um, children, families, and situations in terms of which we could run interventions. And again, the focus within that environment is just to do what you can for the one person you can do something for,
Mm.
because trying to get involved in the sort of socioeconomic side, to me it there might be people that are better at that, but for me, what I was worried about is the child, that's getting abused, or that's going hungry, or whatever. So that's sort of how it started. And then from there, what we did is we moved to Bloemfontein, because I got moved through a church appointment to Bloemfontein. And for a while, we stayed in a better neighborhood, and then we went and purchased again within one of these sort of neighborhoods that was slowly cascading backwards. And also an interesting stint, because there we stayed in what they would call a Schalk Holloway. So it's a structure with 4 purchasable houses on a sectional title property. So you've got a house underneath you, looking to that street, we on top looking this way, and there's another 2 on the side. And we stayed there for a couple of years. We've laughed at it, but it worked out that all of these stints were like 4 years and 8 months exactly, interestingly enough. So we were there for that season. Completely different dynamic. Because I wasn't working for a school there, a lot of the work was more adult intervention, family intervention, marriage intervention. And from there, we moved to Brooklyn in Cape Town. And when we felt it was time for a move, it's quite a funny story, actually. We felt we needed to go to Cape Town. We did a scouting trip. We went to problem areas and had a look at problem areas. And Brooklyn was the last place that we went to look at. And I remember driving down Coburg Road, and we were stopping at a robot, and there was this incident, and it was just wild. And I turned towards my wife and I said, "We need to come live here." And she was like, "No, she's not staying there." And she was heavily resistant about it. She was completely freaked out because, I mean, up until then, I would just say, "Okay, guys, I'm going now," and come back. She would go drop me off somewhere and come back. So she wasn't really exposed to the actual stresses or the violence face to face. I would sometimes bring people home and wake up and say, "Listen, there's somebody that I brought home," and she would care for them. But it was her home space was still quite safe. Whereas this was the first time I think she felt exposed to that. And then we just sort of worked on it and thought about it and prayed about it and meditated on it for a couple of months. And when we were sure we needed to go to Cape Town, I said, "Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to leave it up to you. You find us someplace to live, something that we can afford, and within one of these communities that we scouted out." And honest to God, the only 2 houses that came up were both in Brooklyn. And that sort of settled it for her and her heart. And of the 2 houses, the one was across from Hanky Panky Adult Shop, and the other one was across Solly Kramer's liquor store. So she immediately put in an offer on the one across from the liquor store.
Why? I mean, Hanky Panky, that's like the best name ever for an adult shop.
Because I laughed at that. Yeah, that was interesting. It's in one of the novels, a lot of the characters that, the more colorful characters that you read about, and the incidents, and the sort of this very significant corner of Vasco and Kubrick, that's literally the corner of the Solly Kramers, across which we stayed. And Brooklyn was just tough, man. That was just, you just did what you can where you could, but it's an unstoppable tide. I write about it in the one novel, and it's really what I did at one stage. I don't know if it works like this. I just sort of try and figure things out as I go. But I made a deal with God. I said, "Listen, if it happens in this space here, I'll sort it out. If it happens outside this space, you have to sort it out." Because I was going crazy just with the volume of incidents and interventions that were necessary. And I literally just sort of brought it in and said, "Okay, if something happens in this geographical area, it's a tiny little area, that's my job, and I need to get involved. Doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter how dangerous, how tough it is, that's my job." And that was another 4 years and 8 months. It was a very tough season. And sorry, it was from there that we then moved to Hermanus now. which is like heaven.
How's your wife liking it there now? It's like,
Oh, she
yes,
loves
finally,
it.
peace and quiet.
Yeah, occasionally. So we get when we go to Cape Town, occasionally there's certain things you miss. You miss the vibe, you miss a bit of the culture, some of the sort of scenery and nature. And then when you sort of come down the mountain into the city and you sit in traffic for half an hour and there's 10,000 vagrants running around, and then you're like, okay, Hermanus is a good spot. We are very well insulated from a lot of the nastier stuff in our country in Hermanus. It's a beautiful town. It's still quite safe. And we're thankful. It's a good season. It's since I got out of the life, it's the first season that we've had it's a safe area, it's a beautiful area. There's no stresses in our immediate environment, and we can just sort of relax. So we
Yeah.
are thankful for that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good because I mean, there's only so much time I think that you can spend in that kind of life before it starts burning you out. And I mean, I'm sure, especially as a couple, if your wife's not from the same background as you are and is maybe has been less exposed to those kind of things, explaining it is one thing, but living in it is quite different. And fortunately, I haven't finished Disciples' Fault. I'm a few chapters in, but you've kind of described it there in the book already. That the protagonist is trying to explain to his partner, like, okay, you just experienced this very horrible thing. Protagonist knows what his partner is going through, but the partner still needs to experience that because it's novel, in a bad way, to put it mildly. So I can imagine with your wife just living in that neighborhood, especially if she's resistant at first, and then going through that experience, and then going out of it now and living in actually in a much nicer neighborhood, that there's like this sense of relief and like, okay, we can we can breathe now.
Yeah, definitely. And she's a trooper, so I've always been very thankful for her, and also very proud of her. So a part of our sort of philosophy in terms of our partnership, of our marriage, is that coming from a faith background, we sort of do feel there's a measure of providence when it comes to finding the correct partner. I don't think there's only one correct person for everybody, because what if she dies? I mean, what then? But I do feel that there is a correct or a good partner for you now, and I definitely feel she's my wife and my partner in that sense. And part of that philosophy is that if that's the case, then she's going to fit with me and I'll fit with her. And she's going to have what it takes to be able to adjust to the man that I am. And I'm going to have what it takes to be able to adjust to the woman that she is. And so we've always spoken like that to each other as well. And when things get sort of hairy, is to say, okay, but remember, even though it's tough, we wouldn't be in this thing if we weren't meant for each other, and if we weren't able to sort of manage it and address it. I do think there's something like seasonality and making sure that you are where you should be in the correct time of your life, and whereas I do believe those seasons were timely, I also, like you are saying now, do believe that there was a time for it to finish and for it to pass. And it's the same as with obviously about my injury and me sort of resigning from a bunch of my operational work, but we've been speaking about that for years. It would be arrogant for me to imagine myself carrying on with that type of life forever. I know there are people that feel you can do it, but the reality is that we could feel, it's just a sort of like a slow death by attrition. It's just stresses on stresses, damage on damage, and eventually it's gonna catch up with you. And if you don't leave when you need to leave, then it's on you. And so, whereas I think we were accurate in the seasons, and she did really well, I also do think it was time to say, okay, that's enough now. Yeah, we did our part. Yeah, we did our part. Yeah.
You touched upon a good thing, and it's like talking to to your partner, to your wife, about like you said about you have to find a way to connect with each other and adapt in a way adapt to each other. And this is a mutual thing. Both people have to do it, not just one person. And coming from the background that you have, when it's just everyday stuff, like going to the restaurant, for example, I mean, my girlfriend and I have been together for a long time now, but it took her a while to figure out that it's just easier when we go to the restaurant that she just lets me pick my seat instead of just flopping down and then me asking like, is it okay if I sit there because this is where I need to be, and so on. And at first you explain, and after a while she just lets me do it now. And that is one of a million things that comes up in a relationship, that for, let's say, somebody who isn't used to that, they're just not even thinking about it. They're just like, I'm just going to sit down here. There's a seat. I want to sit here. This is fine. Whereas, for me, it's like, no, this is not fine for me. I'd rather sit over there. And it's always a matter of compromises, of course, of figuring out, like, okay, do I really have to have the absolutely most tactical position right now in this very low crime area, and so on. So it's finding that middle ground, so to speak, that the commonality between, okay, I feel okay sitting here in this position, even if it's not the best one, and you're okay that I didn't make a big deal out of it. But then again,
remembering on the same team.
Yeah. Thing is, it depends on your experiences and the life you were in. I mean, I know somebody who cannot go to a restaurant without first scoping out all the exits and so on, and being there like at least half an hour to an hour up front, so he can see who's coming and going and so on, because he doesn't feel safe otherwise. He was way too deep for way too long, and it's just he can't do it. It's just doesn't work. And that combined with other things like somebody who said that I can't sleep without a weapon. If I don't have a weapon next to me, I just can't sleep because of experiences that they've had. And if you're with a partner to whom all that is extremely new, and or just something from the movies, that's an uphill battle.
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, I think we had, if I could call it, breakthroughs or maybe significant milestones in which we found each other within the context of what you're describing now. One of the things that we've got in our marriage is that we refer to it as climbing the tree. And basically what it is that if I want to climb that tree, I want to climb it, whether you understand it or you agree with me on climbing the tree or not. You do not have to understand every single thing that I want to do, because in a certain sense, our wiring is fundamentally different, and now there's a respect obviously for my wife and for her health and her thinking that I just don't climb every tree and do every silly dangerous thing that I want to. But one of the big growth points for us was when she realized, and I think embraced, the fact that she doesn't have to understand every single thing that I do, and that's okay. And that she can entrust some of that to me. And obviously, for me, I'm going to try and make sure that I'm not a burden for her unnecessarily. And I try to be quite wise about things like that, because especially in the tactical environment, these guys are always on. They're always on. And you mentioned a low crime environment. There's contexts, whether operationally or whether just recreationally, in which we don't have to be on. We can really just relax into it and chill. And I try and do that and also model that. And I think we touched on it in the previous conversation as well. But a lot of people really don't understand the concept of danger management. And so at times my wife will be freaked out about things that I'm not even fazed about, because there's no risk, but she's experiencing fear, and at other times there'll be moments where there's real danger. And I call them the woman, but for the listeners, my wife and my mom and my sister all stay together with me. But then there's moments where there's danger where they understand. There's no question. I don't want to hear anything. They literally, I've told them before, you shut up. If I say left, you go left, and I say right, you go right. Because we've had situations that demanded that. And in that
Yeah.
time, I cannot have to worry about, are you going to do what you're going to do, or managing your fear. You keep your mouth shut, you go where I tell you, and you do what I tell you. And so it's about sort of having found each other within that spectrum, and me not trying to burden them, and being sort of overbearing, and they understanding that when I do say it's go time now, then you sort of keep quiet. And I think the third dynamic that's helped us as well is, I believe in a principle of unity, especially when it comes to significant relationships. So whether it's my wife or my brothers or my family of choice, I don't think democracy is how it works. I firmly believe in unity. And when it comes to my wife and myself, how we make decisions is we wait for unity, and we figure out how to get to a place of unity. Because when there is unity, even if something really bad happens, because both of us own the decision, it means that processing the fallout is going to be easier. But the moment that you're moving from a contentious point or a contentious starting point, and there's fallout, then processing or addressing the fallout is very difficult. And so there's been big decisions in terms of certain types of work that I can do. And I'm going to say that my wife has allowed me to do, because that's what unity is about. And I'm okay saying that. I think a lot of men don't want to say that. But if I really, truly love my wife and I want to live in unity with her, then I need to understand I need her allowance for certain things. And there's been certain types of work where I felt tremendously pressed that this is what I need to do, and she wasn't at peace. And then doesn't matter how difficult it is for me, I need to keep my mouth shut, and we need to have the difficult conversations until we reach a point of unity. And then when we've got the unity, then I move. Because if we own the decision and something terrible happens, I don't come home, then it's easier to manage it. But if I have to not come home, then from my ministry background, then she's going to sit with something that's called complicated or complex grieving process, which is not something I want for, something that a grieving process that should be simple now becomes a mess because there was contentious issues between us. So that's sort of been the milestones for us that we work through. Number one, she understanding. She doesn't have to understand everything I want to do. Number two, not being overbearing versus them trusting us. And then number three, this principle of unity when it comes to family, and making sure that we always move from a position of unity. That's sort of been our safeguards in all of this hard work.
Yeah. And you mentioned a couple of things that I want to touch on, and the first one is like you said, if you come from this background of violence and so on, if you want to leave all that behind, and I did a long episode about that with Terry Trahan, about leaving the life, what it takes, and so on.
It was a great episode.
I think so, and I'll put it in the show notes for the people in the audience who haven't heard it, and I'll put a link to it. Just writing a note right now, because Terry was deep into the life and what it takes to get out of there. Very often, it's finding somebody that is a catalyst of maybe that you've been trying to get out, or you've tried a few times actually and didn't really work. That you find this person that you're like, I want to be with this person, and to do that, I need to get out of this life. But also finding a way to communicate all the baggage that you've accumulated over time, of experiences, good and bad, but also trauma and certain ingrained reactions, ingrained responses. And on top of all that would be a view of what this life is like and what it's about, the reality of living on this planet with other people, which is vastly different from people who grew up in this very sheltered environment. Finding somebody like that is a really big deal, I think. And then gradually getting to the point, like you said, where you get to unity, but you're coming from all the way over here, and they're maybe all the way over there on the other side of that scale. And just finding that middle ground might mean that one person needs to cover a lot more distance than the other one.
Yeah.
What I found for me was that is slowly trying to explain certain things to them by showing it, just by doing it and so on. Trying to not to shock your loved one from the first moment, obviously, but just like bit by bit exposing them to certain things, and so that they figure it out. And with my girlfriend now, we've been together for more than 15 years. It's a lot of things are self-evident now because we talk about it, and I share things with her. It's like, look, did you see this video? Did you see that? Okay, and after a while, they're like, okay, a lot of my life revolves around violence and handling it and so on. That is by far not at all a factor in her life. It's nothing she's occupied with. And that means that it's unknown. Yeah. So other than, general information that you have living on this planet, and finding that that information and giving it to her, I find is a big part. But one of those, moments that I think that really changed it is that with her, I don't train her. She sees me working out a little bit, but she's never with me in class or with my private clients or in seminars, rarely, if ever. So she never sees me really do what I do. And there was this one time, I think about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, that I was invited to a Muay Thai gym. Because I was friendly with the coach, and for whatever reason, I forget I was there. So, I was in pretty good shape back then. And I was working with one of his heavyweights because he had a heavyweight and he's not a heavyweight. So it was difficult for him sometimes to do some sparring sessions. And I was sparring with that heavyweight, and he was a big, strong guy. I mean, I'm not a small person here, but we were sparring. And then, he was having a little bit of difficulty at first with me because I was much more experienced than him, obviously. And you could see that. So that it was clear in the sparring session who was the more experienced fighter. And then afterwards, we were doing combinations and working on the pads. And that was one of the few times that I had somebody who's strong enough to hold the pads for me, that I don't have to hold back. So when I was, for the first time, she saw me going 100%. And then afterwards, she said, like, okay, he was scared when you were kicking the pads. She said, I could see that during the sparring that you could handle him. She doesn't understand technique maybe and strategy and tactics, but she's like, I could see that you were the better guy. Sorry?
She understands dominance.
Yes. And but then she saw, like, okay, so when my boyfriend kicks somebody who's also pretty strong, it's scary. And then the contrast with when I'm with her, there's none of that. So it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde thing, where, okay, underneath the surface of who I am in our relationship, there's this big ugly monster that sometimes can come out when it's necessary. And everything that entails is what I found for many people who are in the life, left the life, law enforcement and so on, for a significant other is trying to make the other person understand from a very, very different life experience. Like, look, there is a lot of dark shit in the world, and it's my job to handle it, or I've experienced it, or it's come my way and it's left a mark on me, whatever it is. And this is me. And if you want to be with me, we're going to have to find a way to, at a certain point, get to this consensus reality of, like, this is how we view things. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, definitely. It brings up an interesting sort of dichotomy between how much, or let me start by this. I think, especially when it comes to our significant relationships, brothers, family of choice, and your marriage partner or your long-term partnership like yourself, we do have a deep desire to be known. It's like we can't get around that. It's the level of our transparency sort of has a very direct influence on our intimacy. Yeah? So how well you know me says a lot and influences a lot about the quality or the depth of this relationship that we've got. And so that's the one side of this coin, is that I really, really want her to know me. I want my parents to know me. I want my close brothers. Usually it's the brothers that do know you, but you really want those significant people in your life to know you. But then on the other side, there's this thing about how much do we really want them to know us,
Yeah.
and where's that line? Because for me, sometimes like and this might be a little quirk that I've got, because I've got a sensitivity towards offending people. Comes from an incident when I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and the thing has been haunting me since. But I can tell you now, when we ring, and I've got severe obsessive OCD, like a serious problem, which flares up. I'm okay now, but I've got very bad episodes, and you'll just see me disappear for a couple of months. But when we end this call, for the next 2 days, I'm going to be paranoid about whether I said something that's going to make you not like me. This is my
Got it.
Yeah, this is my life. I can't get away from it. I've had it since that incident, and it just is what it is, no? And so I've got the sensitivity about burdening people, and is it too much now? But I've also got this very deep desire that I really want them to know me, and I want to feel known, and that's sort of for me, it's a very human problem. It's not a very logical thing, that fits into our sort of human idiosyncrasies. But that's also a theme that you're bringing up. Is there's this part of us that wants to be known, and we want to talk about these things, but at some stage, maybe we're going to become a burden. It might be too much, it might be too dark. Because there's obviously there's things you've experienced, and there's things that I've experienced that I'll never tell them,
Yeah.
because it will do nothing other than mess with them.
I was just talking about that with somebody the other day, and saying, and I mean, long conversation, but in that, and I asked them, like, of all the people you've known or that have been through some shit, if you had to quantify of all the experience that you had in that area, the stuff you very casually talk about with anyone, the stuff you would reserve for people who like, okay, they understand, even if they're a stranger, but you come into a team, a new team or whatever, and like, everybody's experience, so you can share stuff immediately. And then we get to the other part, which is the stuff that you would only tell to people who actually you trust. And then we get to the parts where you make confessions to your pastor or whatever. And then we get to the stuff you will never ever share with anyone. And this is one of the things for me that I found when you talk to people sometimes, and they've been in some sort of life where you can feel that there's a lot of that last category in their life. There's a lot of stuff they will never talk about, but it has an effect, obviously. And the result for me in my personal life of these kind of things has been that I have very much an aversion to shallow people. Like, if it's all like, oh, Schalk, everything is awesome, it's so great, this is so good, oh my god, I can't believe it.
And superficial conversation, I can't handle it. Small talk, I struggle with small talk tremendously. No, I'm 100% with you on that. It's interesting that you highlighted, because it's never actually made sense to me within this context. So I think that's a bit of a revelation for me as well. So I'm grateful towards that, because I do struggle with that. It's a very real issue for me. The moment I sense superficiality or shallowness, I struggle. It's like my brain shuts down, and I don't know how to communicate with this person. And then my natural thing is I need to get out of there. I don't want to be part of the conversation anymore. I went through, obviously now having retired last year, and after the injury, by some grace, I've got a drive in me, so I'm not a guy that shuts down. If I've got stuff to figure out, I figure it out. So if I mean, I'm talking about psychological issues, emotional issues, whatever. If there's a problem, I take it like anything else, and I sort it out. So I knew after my injury that the transition is going to take work. It's going to need work. So there were a couple of phases that I went through. One of the phases that I went through was, I'm finishing this life, and I feel alone because a bunch of my brothers that really knew me in the sense that we spoke now, they were part of that. And now I'm leaving that behind, okay? And you can say what you want to. The nature of covert or clandestine work is that when you step out of it, you're out of it because they
Yeah.
can't share the secrets. It just is what it is. So it's okay. I was fine with it. But now I needed to navigate, and I'm still trying to navigate the transition. So I went through a whole issue about, okay, what is the quality of my relationships outside of that? And long story short, what I did was I sat here the one morning, and just off the top of my mind, I made a list. The list was called Things I Did While You Were Sleeping. Okay. And it was just a long list like this. I typed the thing on WhatsApp, and I reached out to two brothers that don't come from the life. They come from my church side, my ministry side. I said, listen, I'm okay, so I'm not falling apart, but I'm going to send you something. And I don't want you to do anything about it. I don't want you to counsel me or to go into pastor mode. What I want you to do is to read the list, and I want to know if I can ask you some questions about it when I'm done. And they were like, yeah, of course. So I sent them the list. And my main questions were, number one, how many of these things have I ever divulged to you?
Mm.
And one said, none. In 15 years, you never shared any of this. The other one said, I knew about one theme, but apart from a broad theme, you never divulged anything else. And my question to them was, okay, what does that say about our relationship? You know, because I was trying to figure out how to now. So listen, to your listeners, I just want to say, I go through existential crises like other people go through diets, okay? So, so if I talk about these things, just know that I'm mostly stable. But yeah, this is just who I am. So I mean, you'll get to know me. But anyway, because it was a thing for me. I was going through this thing about how real is this relationship if I've never spoken about these things to you, and are you okay with that or not? Because I was struggling to figure out how to deal with going forward. And the one was very helpful. He said, "Well, you know what? He just really doesn't care, and we're fine." And the
Mm.
other one said, "But you know what? Look, here we're speaking about it now. So even if we haven't ever spoken about it, we're speaking about it now, and maybe that means something, you know, in terms of the thing that you're searching for." But it was off the top of my mind, not comprehensive, limited to things that were happening in the dark.
No.
And in 15 years that I knew these two guys, I've never said a word to either of them about it. And I think that's something that a lot of people that don't come from this background, they don't always get, that we walk around with this sort of list of highly significant events, you know, that are very impactful, that one or two of them are life-changing for certain people, okay? And we go through these things and they're just stuck inside you. And part of my journey is to learn how to speak about these things, because what I see with the guys that are mine, your elders, let's say we go to 65, 70 years old. The guys that don't deal with it, that don't integrate it, they isolate themselves. And
No.
eventually I say, one of three things happens. Number one, they isolate themselves because all of their friends continue to operate past their sell-by date, okay? They isolate themselves because their friends shoot themselves because they never dealt with their stuff. Because this is a real problem when we're thinking about this category of person. Or number three, they isolate themselves by sort of falling into some sort of vice. But that's the usual trajectory if you are not able to transition into new relationships and different types of relationships, you know, and it's not something I want for myself or for my wife or for our house. And so I'm very much trying to deal with that in the season of my life is how to negotiate new relationships. How do we speak about certain things? You know, how do we manage certain types of conversations? Because I don't want to end up in 10 or 20 years and then I'm alone, you know, and I don't have
No.
significant relationships. I don't want to be that guy. Most of your experts on the topic will say that healthy interactions day to day with other human beings are a significant part of your health.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to lose out on that as I grow older, because I'm just keeping everything stuck in my mind. Obviously, how to go about that wisely, and again, not being a burden on other people, that needs a lot of work. Yeah.
Well, what I found is that one way to approach it, that's what I did, is compartmentalize. I'm very lucky in that I have a number of friends that I can talk to about some of the dark stuff, because they get it, either because they've been there or for a variety of reasons professionally that they've encountered it, so that when there's a need to talk about certain things, I can. But like my family, my sisters don't know me. My in-laws don't really know me, because it's not a part of their life, and I don't see any reason why I would start talking about. If you actually do want to permanently damage a knee, this is actually the best way to do it with that knife. It's just not a conversation that's gonna happen at the next birthday party. So a lot of that kind of stuff for me is something that I a while ago was figuring out. When I went through my dark period, and I basically thought that, okay, my need to talk about these things, I have a way of meeting that need, but I understand I have to do this with people to whom it is not a burden, like you just said a while ago, in the sense that you kind of dump it on them, like, there you go, and I feel better because I talked about it, but more along the lines of a burden that I know they cannot carry, because it is so far out of their daily life that we are dimensions apart when it comes to this topic. So, I am at the birthday party and there's a lot of small talk and this and that, but that is not an issue for me, because these are my loved ones. These are the people, these are my family. So I'm like, it's okay if they don't know that part of me. Like with my girlfriend, she never seen me cut loose. Okay, she needed to see that to understand certain things, but the rest of the family doesn't have to know that. They don't have to see that. They know Wim does this martial arts self-defense thing, and that's good enough for me. I know that all these topics, like, I won't even talk about it. If something comes up, like they saw something on the news, something happened, or this and that, or there's a video of some fight accident, whatever, if it does come up, I typically don't talk about it. I don't comment, because there's no point. How can I try to convince them that, like, what you just said about this thing is completely wrong, and it is difficult for you to understand this because the reality is counterintuitive. The most, in your ID, logical response is actually the opposite of what you should be doing. But there's this whole enormous amount of baggage and of information, experience, and so on that I would have to give you first before you'd say, like, of course. Whereas with somebody else, they say, of course, because
there's a foundation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you can compartmentalize in your relationships that part, where like, okay, this person I can talk to about that, this person I can talk to about that, and we do that anyway. I mean, we do that anyway in relationships. Like, if you know somebody has a pet peeve about I don't know, the color yellow, you're just not going to bring it up. We're not going to talk about that. And that's the way I've been doing it for a long time now, and it's worked out pretty good. I mean, my in-laws haven't kicked me out. I'm still in good standing with my mother-in-law, so that's fine. And I understand that people, like, who knew me 30, 40 years ago, they don't know me now anymore, because a lot of the stuff that happened in my life, I never shared with them. I don't see the need to share with them. It's like, here, I haven't seen somebody in a while. We start talking, how have you been? I've been pretty good. I almost killed somebody last night. That's not the conversation they want to hear. They're not interested in hearing it. So why go there? But then that accumulates over time into a bunch of experience, that this gap between us gets bigger. And then I think my decision was, it's on me to not get to the point where that they feel this gap. Because I like this person, I like to talk to this person. So it's not their fault that they haven't experienced that. So I'm just like, okay, I will be the person who comes closer to their reality as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah, that's very sensible. Yeah, that's very sensible. I think it's it might also be sort of coming from a slightly unhealthy place, you know, if I can be very honest about it. I think because I've got that insecurity about you know, certain types of relationships, it might be that I need to keep the need in check, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So I need
Yeah.
to watch myself that I don't try and overcompensate, you know. So it's something that I'm always sort of aware of, you know. It's like I can feel the anxiety start, um, and then I need to check myself and just sort of bring it back a little bit, you know, and just say everything is okay. Actually, we don't have to go there. Actually, even if I don't share this with Pete, of course, we're still all right. It's okay,
Yeah.
you know. I
Yeah.
don't have because of this transparency issue of that I've got. I'll very easily feel that if I'm not being fully transparent, I'm not being true to the relationship, you know. And so I always have to sort of manage myself in that sense
Yeah.
and make and remind myself that things are actually okay. And it's a bit of a it's part of the OCD, and I'm better with it because I understand it and I can see it coming. But it doesn't really have an off switch, you know. So there's sort of that management part of it the whole time. And another thing, I think another dynamic when it comes to this, I made a post on my personal Facebook about it. I post about this type of thing, and people think I'm insane, but I'm very, very open about these types of things because there's a lot of people that struggle with it, and I feel we need to talk about it. So I post about these types of things. But I made a post about the sort of a bit of the family dynamics that I come out of, and the fact that I don't actually come from a stable, connected, extended family at all. So there's literally in my whole extended family, there was one aunt that I had a long distance relationship with, and she passed away just after my father. But what people don't realize, again, now coming from my ministry background, is that it's those relationships in an early age that sort of anchor you
Yeah.
into a stable experience of life, you know, that there are people that I can rely on, that I can turn to, that I can count on. In the absence of that, and it's not just me that struggle with this, millions of people struggle with this. In the absence of that, it's almost like you feel like you're drifting the whole time.
Yeah.
And you're drifting through life and you're not really anchored to anything. I've told my wife many times, if she'd had to die, I would probably take a backpack and just go and drift. That would probably be what I would do. I can very easily see myself do that because that's how I feel the whole time. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
drifting consistently. And so relationally, I also feel like I drift the whole time. But it's not really the case, if that makes sense, you know. So I need
Yeah.
to watch myself on that because I can project the risk is there that I project that damage that I've sustained onto my relationships. And
Yeah.
what I when I was younger is then I would damage the relationship because I would come across as needy, or I would be overbearing, or I would be demanding. But actually everything is fine. It's just that I needed to learn how to walk with this sense of being disconnected, and to remind myself constantly that even though that's what I'm feeling right now, it's not actually the case. There are solid people around me, specifically my family of choice, that are very stable, that I can rely on, that I'm connected to, that anchor me to life. And the work is just I need to remind myself of that. If I don't, then my default place is I go back to this thing of I feel disconnected and like I'm drifting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's just, and I mean that's the work we have to do. You know, we can't. None of us we come from where we come from. We didn't have a hand in that. You know, so we were dealt certain cards. It is what it is. The only thing we can do is we can try and figure out how do I take that, process it, integrate it into my life, and try and figure out how to live a healthy life going forward. And for me, I think the quicker that you embrace that some of these dynamics will be with you probably until the day you die. You know,
Yeah.
the ideal for me would be that I become a fully free, healthy person. I dream about that, I pray for that, I trust for that. But the reality is some of this stuff is going to be with me until I die. And so the best I can do is I can be self-aware and try and figure out how to live with it, how to deal with it, and take responsibility for it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I was recently talking to somebody about that, and you mentioned that a while ago, because so for the audience, I post on my Instagram reels. I share a bunch of, usually what I try to find is funny videos, and I'll write stuff. Write a comment like "mistakes were made" is one of my favorites, because it's always funny to see somebody do something stupid, obviously. And you and I sometimes, have some private messages about some of the stuff that I share. And there's one where recently, I forget whether it was on my Facebook page or on Instagram, where you mentioned something about, you see somebody losing their shit basically, and you said that the explanation of like a child throws a tantrum. An adult who does that is somebody who never grew up. Basically, it's a child in a grown-up body. And I think that is a really good, insightful thing to understand is that it's the purpose. It should be maybe the purpose, in my not so humble opinion. It should be the purpose that you keep on growing and learning and progressing as you get older. We have this idea, I think, subconscious maybe, or unspoken understanding that I think is faulty in many Western countries of, you're a baby, they care for you, you go to kindergarten, you go to school, you maybe go to a college, and then you're done learning. No, you're not. That's when it actually starts. And this whole idea of like keeping on trying to better yourself and have a better understanding of yourself, accept that you have some stuff that you're carrying around that maybe will never change, but okay, you can work around that. You can make other aspects of your personality bigger, focus on those. Or like a good friend of mine says, that I learned that from him, and he says, whenever I see somebody do something which is like a douchebag asshole move, or says something insulting or along those lines, I think of, okay, do I do anything like that? And then if you come to the conclusion like, actually, yes, I do. Holy crap, I need to work on this. And then you've got something else to work on. And I have a temper, and I am impatient. That's my personality. And most people who know me, they don't believe me when I say that, because I've worked really, really, really hard to stay out of prison and keep control of my temper. And also be more patient with people, because nobody made me God and that I can judge everybody. So God knows that I fuck up all the time. So maybe it's a good idea to be patient with other people and cut them some slack. The problem with that is when I'm out of patience, it's really gone. It's really gone.
It's interesting. Some of the things you're mentioning now, it's not something that I've put on my social media, because it's just one of the ways I feel I want to invest back into my community. But I'm just finished hosting my first 4-week cycle of a process that I'm calling Peace and Fulfillment. And it's not a course, it's not a workshop, because as a minister, it falls into some of my area of competence, but it can be argued that it falls more into the psychology area of competence. And so I don't want to infringe on something outside of my area of competence. So I'm not giving training. I'm calling it a guided conversation. And the reason I'm hosting this is I'm really noticing that most of the people around me don't experience peace on a day-to-day basis. They just don't. They experience anxiety, stress, sleepless nights. Their nervous system is running rampant all the time. And also fulfillment. More and more I'm coming across people that don't really have a deep sense of why are they doing the things that they're doing, and experiencing fulfillment from it, and that brings you to a place where you start asking questions like, what's it all about? What's the point of it all? Why should I carry on? And that, I mean, you would know that takes you to a very dark place, so just trying to sort of invest back and sort of stimulate the conversation about the fact that you are able to experience peace throughout your day, number one, but also a deep sense of fulfillment and meaning. But
Yeah.
anyways, I'm busy with that process. But one of the key things that came out when I did sort of like a debrief after the process with the attendees, very, very, very few people understand the reality that my nervous system can be regulated or dysregulated, number one. And number two, that the ability to regulate my nervous system started or should have started with what's called co-regulation as a child. Because we learn regulation through looking into the face of a caregiver and seeing in them everything is okay and absorbing back from them peace. That's how we regulate. Because then what happens is anger comes because a boundary was transgressed and it goes. Sadness comes and it goes, because we learn how to regulate. So learning, you're calling it patience, but regulating your nervous system, first of all, was supposed to be something that was trained into you as a child. Most people that I'm talking to don't know that, and it was definitely not their experience. So now they're adults and they can't regulate themselves. They can't regulate their nervous systems. And so there's something, and I've got my opinions on where it went wrong, but some things have gone wrong over the last 50 years in our society, where we're sitting now with grown-ups that are not able to regulate their emotions. And it's sort of it started somewhere. So I'm taking a break now because I'm sick, but I'm probably going to run a couple of more cycles, and just sort of wherever I can find somebody, just tell them to come and do it, because it's a huge need at this stage. There's peace works in specific ways. For you to have peace, you need to tick certain boxes. To feel meaning and fulfillment, you need to tick certain boxes. And most people that I'm talking to don't really understand that. And so they're going through their lives on autopilot, and sadly, tragically, they don't experience peace and they don't experience fulfillment. Yeah.
Well, there was this article recently, and I'm going to mess up the details, but anyway, it was along the lines of, did we make a mistake with trigger warnings? And more something along the lines of, a therapist said that he saw increasingly a number of young people that he needed to give therapy that were they had a lot of anxiety and stress about things where, objectively speaking, there wasn't a lot of danger. It wasn't really a problematic issue compared to 10, 20 years ago, where he would see youngsters of the same age come in with much more severe issues that rightfully they were triggered by. And that we've basically shifted in society in a direction where people are triggered by basically anything and everything, and they have no resilience anymore. So the whole idea, the concept of anti-fragility, basically not that the adversity actually makes you stronger, and as opposed to that, well, adversity is no, we have to avoid that at all costs. I think a lot of it has to do with soft men make hard times, and that whole cliche. We're kind of in that position now. Well, I think we've turned the corner, actually, because the whole call it woke or whatever postmodernist thinking is actually, the backlash is picking up steam now. That people are like, I'm done with this nonsense, leave me alone, and this and that. I'm trying to get somebody on the podcast to talk about transgenderism in sports, because that is a hot button topic right now, and I think there's a lot to be said about that when it comes to combat sports, which I think is, I've sparred with women, and I've seen men and women fight each other, and when we're not talking about a tennis game, we're talking about a situation in which people actually can severely injure each other on purpose, because you're punching and kicking each other. So it kind of matters. But all of that, only a few years ago, you couldn't even touch that. So, and that on top of this whole thing in many Western societies, there's a big part of the problem is we're going from a unipolar to a multipolar world. like the status of the United States as the dominant world power is shrinking, and we've got a rising power in China and so on. And it's going to change. It is changing rapidly at a pace that people haven't. They're not paying attention. Why? Because typically the media doesn't cover this very well. But there's a lot of change happening, and at the same time, we're basically at this end stage of. There's a really good book called The Fourth Turning. And it talks, I'm going to oversimplify, it talks about there's cycles in human society that are bigger than one human lifespan. That's a good way to view it.
Okay.
So, and you have people, a generation that dies off, then they can no longer give those lessons to the next generation that is coming up. So that information gets lost. And that creates other problems, and that cycle keeps on repeating.
Yeah.
There's a lot of criticism about the book as well, but it's actually worth reading. And we're basically at the fourth turning. Sorry?
It does make sense. No, it makes sense. I mean, without us having to unpack it too much, I can very easily see that happening.
Yeah.
I can understand people criticizing it as well, but from a logical point of view, to me, it makes sense. You know, it's
What we have, for instance, right here, one of the things we're seeing now is that the institutions are failing and systems are failing. There's a guy, Balaji Srinivasan, who I think, you know, if you're interested in what's going on in the world, it's worth following. Very smart guy. And he basically has this thing that he's written about, that I keep on quoting him on, is that we are ruled by clowns and arrogant idiots who inherited systems that they could never build themselves. They are instituting policies and making important changes to systems, to society, and so on, that they have no idea what the consequences are, because they are lacking that information that died out with previous generations, and it's breaking down. And you can see this everywhere, in Western countries in particular, but also all over the world. For instance, there's in 2 weeks, the highway around Brussels, which is one of the busiest, most traffic dense places in Europe. They're going to work on a bridge for 8 years. They built that bridge, I think, in the 60s in 2 or 3 years. Why does it take 8 years to fix it? Why? There's reasons for that, and they have to do with basically all the structures and the systems in society. They are run by people who don't know how to build them, and they do stupid things.
Definitely, I think two of your there's a good book about systems thinking. Peter Senge, The Fifth Discipline. So if you're into systems thinking, you can really get your hands onto that. But there's I'm going to get to something he said now. Let me first say another thing. I think societal systems are actually built over significantly longer periods of time than which we understand. And we don't always realize that. And one of the problems that we're facing today is that people are messing with systems that have been in place for a reason for a very long time. And they see that as a problem. You know, this thing has been in place for a very long time. And sometimes it's the case, but the reality is that it's probably been in place for a very long time because it worked, and it's been there for a reason. And now what we're seeing in today's world is sort of, there's very much a breakdown or a disrespect of a lot of those very long-standing, centuries-old sort of practices, which is very risky, because what you'll see in the Peter Senge sort of book about systems is, the whole issue about a system is you get two sort of changes. You get what's called a high leverage and a low leverage change on a system. Whichever you use, they only display the effect of the change after a certain period of time. If you have to take a very simple example, would be certain shower systems where you open the cold water and you open the warm water, but the hot water takes forever to come through, you know, and then finally the hot water comes through, and now it's too hot because you opened it too much. So now what you do is you turn down the hot water again, and now everything goes, and the whole cycle just sort of starts, you know. So in certain systems, if you start tweaking and making changes, you actually only see the end results too far down the line. you know, and there's a bit of a wisdom issue when it comes to that I'm worried that I'm not seeing it. You know, there's sort of a lack of wisdom and a lack of
Yeah.
insight. You know, it's just about, let's see how much we can tear down, without necessarily regarding and maybe, you know, another point you made, and it's also sort of a systemic thing. You use the word resilience, and resilience is a word that's very much used in broad context in today's age. But resilience is this idea of being able to bounce back.
Yeah.
So if I'm saying somebody's resilient, it means he can bounce back to a position that he was at, which means that if somebody's resilient, he must have been at that position already at some time in his or her past. And so we're talking about resilience. So we're talking about these youngsters that don't have resilience, and even systems that don't have resilience. But let's talk about the youngsters that don't have resilience. If we're saying they have to bounce back, we're assuming that they've been there at some stage. Does that make sense? And that's a dangerous assumption because of the tear down that we're seeing in today's world. You know, we are projecting positions of resilience onto them. But who says they've ever been there? You know, who says they've ever been tough enough or hard enough to be able to bounce back to that? Maybe we've raised very soft children, you know, so now they can't bounce back even. So I think even the concept of resilience, it's something we need to re-examine and not just ask ourselves, why isn't this child bouncing back? We should ask ourselves, was the original correct position even built or not? You know, was there or not? You know, or are we projecting it from our own experience and we're assuming it was there? If that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah. No, I think I know what you mean. The another aspect of you know, why are people so stressed and anxious and so on? Why can't they find peace? Like I said, we're living in this chaotic time. If you can compare this period, everything that's going on, to many previous periods in history, this is actually the pre-revolutionary stage, where societies are about to go kinetic, where it's about to be violence, whether it's revolution, whether it's war, and so on. All the same indicators are there. The difficult part about saying this something like that is that, and I'm the first one to say, you know, I got it wrong, is that the timeline is incredibly difficult to predict. Like, what will set it off? The killing of Franz Ferdinand did not create a world war. There were many things that happened before that caused, and in Dutch we have a difference between the reden and oorzaak, and in English it's both cause.
Okay.
But it means something different, and it's not inciting incident. It's just like I don't know a good way to translate it, but like the First World War and the Second World War, there is a reason why they said, like, and now it's war. But there are many incidences that caused that one inflection point to happen, that kicked it over into kinetic and full-out war. And let's talk about all the stuff that happened before that one incident. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Okay, yes, we say, and this caused the World War. Okay, now let's talk about everything that came beforehand, because that's what builds up this tension, that eventually there's only one match that needs to be lit and it all goes off. We're living in an age where there's so many incidents that are happening that are creating this tension, and people feel it in their day-to-day life, whether they consciously think about it or not. There's a lot of stress and tension going on about things. Worried about the war in Ukraine, worried about inflation, and then there's always something and this and that. But at the same time, we've got this avalanche of information coming at us, and people are not equipped to handle it. And we increasingly live in a world where, and I call it, because I reference a TV show in which it was said, the father says it to his teenage son, who thinks he knows everything, because of course as a teenager you know everything, and he says, your knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep. And that is what I feel mostly when I talk to a lot of people who are younger than I am, and also my age and older, is that they have an opinion about a lot of things, but it's a very shallow opinion. And like just recently here in Belgium, there's a big thing about a big company that wanted to open a plant to make ethylene, which is basically what the most important chemical in the world is what it's called, because it's used in so many products and derivatives. And there's a big fuck up there from our government. Doesn't matter. And some guy said something along those lines of, yeah, but who needs another plastics factory anyway? And somebody replied with, you wouldn't be able to tweet this without that. And the guy answers then, yeah, last I checked, stuff like silicium and copper and so on doesn't require plastics. Now, and I'm, you dumb motherfucker. You stupid fucking idiot. Go look at the mining company that is digging all that shit up and look how much plastics they use in their equipment, in everything. Then go to the factory that built your freaking iPhone and see how much they depend on all these derivatives and these chemical products and so on. You literally wouldn't be able to tweet at all. And if you look around you in the room, take away everything that uses chemicals, you're sitting on your fucking bare ass in a hut. That's what would happen. We go back 100, 200 years in time in quality of life and technology. And people don't know. They don't know. And then we get to what we just talked about. They make decisions. They vote for policies that are just insane because they're not tenable in the long run. My rant is over.
No. It's a very valid rant. I think what I would add to that, so let's say we are discussing the key contributors to the coming revolution. So what we've got is we've got lack of insight, which is what we explained. Yes. It's not just knowledge, it's insight, because depth will bring insight and wisdom. And so it's not just information, but it's being able to show insight and allowing that insight to drive sensible decision making. So we've got lack of insight. Then we've got the hard stressors, the violence, the war, the cry, all of those things. And then I would say another thing that we should put on the table is that the toxicity of the culture currently. And I think the toxic culture issue has sort of been the old cliche frog in hot water example that people haven't really noticed it. But if you really have to go and consider society at this stage, and you do a broad sweep, there's a very good book on it. I'll mention the book. It's called The Myth of Normal from Dr. Gabor Mate. And if you do a very broad stroke and you consider everything from working conditions, health, nutrition issues, sleeping issues, expectations that are put on people, different types of stresses, and we're honest about it, then we're actually living in the most toxic culture in the history of man. And the negative kickback of that is what we would call capacity, or lack of capacity. And so now we're sitting with people that have got no capacity. So I'm using the word these days capacity instead of resilience. So they've got no capacity to manage stresses, to manage themselves, to manage problems, to manage conflict. There's no capacity. It's just been worn down, ground down. They're facing all of the uncertainty and upheaval, and they've got a lack of insight as well. And I think those three need to be put together. I think all three of those three sort of feed into the same dynamic. And it's on the capacity side, it's something that I'm trying to sort of, wherever I can, just try and get people to align a little bit, because in today's world, you need capacity. You need to be able to keep a cool mind, to think about things, to have sensible conversations, to be healthy, to sleep well, to have energy. If you don't have capacity for today's life, you're not going to make it, So because the culture is toxic, it's poisoning you around every single corner. If you're not wake up and you're not wary for it, it's going to really just ground you to bits. So I think toxic culture is a definite issue as well. And I don't think people are realizing it, because they just think it's normal. This is how it should be. It is what it is. This is life now. So we need to sort of just live it the way everybody else lives it. And we're not realizing the tremendous adverse effects it's having on our health and our mental health. mental health from a ministry point of view, you know how many people yes, there are so many people struggling with mental health issues these days. And then people are like, yeah, but it wasn't like that when we were younger. It's because the culture wasn't as toxic when we were younger. We're missing the connections there because we're not really, again, lack of insight. I think that comes back to that point of yours. We're not knowledgeable about what does the human organism require to function optimally. You know, what if I need to sort of take a model for the human organism, and let me take one from a biblical model, which I can also scientifically justify. But I've got a body, I've got what we would refer to as a soul. But biblically, if you go and look at the scriptures of a soul, it basically comes down to you've got a mind, you've got a volition or will, and you've got an intellect. So you've got body, mind, emotion, will or intellect. And then we've got the spiritual side, which I believe is a definite as well. So for me as a human being, I've got these dynamics or elements, and I need to understand how they work, and I need to honor how they work. So I need to figure out, how do these things function? What do they require to function optimally? And I need to take the responsibility for attending to those things. And again, there's a lack of insight there. People don't get that, so they don't attend to themselves. And especially mental health, I don't know, maybe because I'm not as busy these days, I'm thinking about the things more. But especially with mental health, with physical health, you know, if your body starts going you know, backwards, there's signs and symptoms. You can pick it up. You can see yourself getting overweight. You can feel yourself getting slow. You can see the cancerous growth on your arm, you know. But with mental health, it's not really that evident, you know. We just think it is what it is, you know. This is me, you know. I have to deal with this, or this is how it's going to be. But we don't realize there's a culture that's busy grinding us down, and we need to do the work to understand how these things function, and we have to honor those things. You know, we have to love ourselves and care for ourselves enough that we look after ourselves. There's this thing Jordan Peterson says, and I know he's quite contentious on a bunch of issues, but I'm sort of behind this statement of his. He says we need to look after ourselves in the same way that we would do our best friends. Because we would care for our friends, even our dogs.
Yeah.
These days, you'd give your dog medicine when he needs to get it. You feed him when he needs to be fed. You look after your dog's health. So there's people in this world that literally do more for their animals than they do for themselves, you know. So there's a self-love and a self-care issue there, which sort of loops back to mental illness and wellness and well-being, that we need to sort of explore and try and figure out what's happening here. You know, why am I not looking after myself? Why am I not attending to myself? The beautiful thing is that we've got all the knowledge available. You know, that's the wonderful thing in today's world. You know, we are actually able to equip ourselves to do this, but we don't. You know, we sort of don't attend to our mental health. And then when we 40, 50, 60 years old, we sort of hit that very dark space in our lives. You know, either we go through a midlife crisis and we screw up everything we've built, or maybe we fall apart completely. But it doesn't have to be like that. You know, we can really look after ourselves. But it starts with understanding that the culture that we live in is toxic. It's poisonous, you know.
There's something else that I feel we should add to that, and that one of my students who does public speaking and consulting and a bunch of other stuff at a really high level said that if you look at, you know, late 2019, December 2019, and you would say, like, what's the most important thing for you? What will you do next year, and this and that? And if you would have written that down and you read it, and then it's the end of 2020, the first year of the pandemic is over, you look back at those things you wrote down, and what do you think now is important? So is that this paradigm shift has happened with this pandemic that hit, and it on all accounts, my opinion is that the pandemic could have been a whole lot worse. There have been worse pandemics in the history of the world, so this one was actually by far not as bad as it could have been. But but the point is that we've had from 2019, you had these ideas, these plans, this is what I'm going to do, and blah, blah, blah. The pandemic hits, everything changes.
Yeah.
Now, if you look 2019, what was the most stressful stuff and all the crazy stuff that happened then? Then you take 2020, first year of the pandemic, it's just insane. 2021, was that actually less crazy than 2020? I would beg to differ. Was 2022 less crazy than 2021? I think there's a good case to be made that it wasn't. Is 2023 looking to be less crazy than 2022? I don't think so. So we're going from 2019 to 2023, which is over halfway done, and the new normal has radically changed and ramped up in intensity. And like almost everybody that I meet, any adult that I meet, that we talk to, and doesn't matter if I know him well or not, and we get to the point where we talk about certain things, and then this moment is there when the other person or I say like, the whole world is just gone crazy, and they're like, yeah, and that feeling like it's just insane, and it's getting more and more insane is what a lot of people have, which I think is contributing to the anxiety tremendously, especially for young people.
I think so as well. Yeah.
Right now we have, if I could just finish this, and I'll let you, I'll shut up for
Oh, no, please.
The president of the World Health Organization has basically, I think it was him, could be that I'm mixing up with another one, but I'm pretty sure it was him, said something along the lines of like, we have to, or it could be the UN panel on climate change, I think, because I'm mixing two in my head here, said something along the lines of that we have to be careful with the gloom and doom about the environment. We don't want to panic, because then people will think that, why bother? Because we're screwed anyway. And we have this whole generation of young people. A lot of them have what they now call climate anxiety, because they're like, the world is doomed, and why go to school? Because there won't be a world in 10 years or whatever the next deadline is that they put out. So, and now there's those big organizations are like, oh, maybe we went too far. We need to dial it back down again. And then I'm like, you motherfuckers. You motherfuckers. Because either it was fucking urgent or it wasn't. But you're not going to say now that, well, we kind of overstated our case a little bit, so we're going to, dial it down a little bit. You fuckers, you've an entire generation is fucked up and scared of everything, and any new fucking headline that they see in the newspaper or on the internet that says that the next prediction of catastrophe and whatever's going to happen next with the climate, and now you're saying that, well, it actually isn't that bad. We have to be optimistic. Like, fuck off! You scared us for years on end. And me being Gen X, I'm like, fuck you all with your bullshit. I'm not a boomer, so
American is it for them to sit back there and to make decisions on how they are going to manage the collective experience of humanity. How arrogant is that? That they, let me get a little bit of light. It's like it's getting dark.
Yeah, a while ago I said, this is
it's
good.
arrogant. It's that they sit there and they believe, okay, oh, we overstated it, so let us dial it down so that we can influence world opinion in a, in this or that manner. Something that I try and do, and it comes back to the mental health thing, and I'm sharing a lot of personal stuff here, but we said we're just going to go over whatever. I tend to, with my OCD, so when I've got a bad flare-up, my thing that I obsess about is I'm going to die soon. So I walk around and I tell myself I'm going to die soon. And people that don't understand OCD, like I've had somebody said, but we're all going to die. I said, no. There's a difference between knowing I'm going to die and telling myself I'm going to die soon and experiencing the anxiety of I'm going to die soon, and then being able to convince myself why it's true that I'm going to die soon. Okay, so I've got this thing about dying. Now, alongside of that, something that I struggle with tremendously, and it's probably got to do with a lot of the stuff we spoke about earlier, I can very easily get lost in not understanding why I'm alive or what's the goal of it. It's
Mm.
I have to be very objective about it. And the women think they don't like me talking like this, but it's true. If I die tomorrow, they're going to be sad for a year. After 3 years, they're going to move on. Then they're going to put a photo of me against the wall. And then every now and again, they're going to, on my birthday, remember me and cry a little bit. In 10 years, nobody's going to remember me, man. You understand? So what's the point of this whole thing, And I'm going to invest all of this energy now for the next 50 years, and then what's the use? So I can very easily drift there,
Yeah.
and I need to watch myself because it's not always healthy. Sometimes it's just a drift. Sometimes it sort of becomes a bit of a problem. But something that I've had to teach myself to do is to shorten the time span over which I evaluate my life.
Mm.
The time span is too long, I lose it. Then it weighs me down. It becomes hopeless. I start to flounder when it comes to things like meaning and all of that. So I need to bring it in. I need to be very, very compact with how do I try and function in a way that I experience peace and fulfillment and joy. And for me, and it sounds like a cliche, but it really has become about trying to experience my day and getting to the end of my day and having had moments that I can tell myself you did well. And for me to have done well, there's various things. I worked hard. I worked well. I spent time with Wim or with somebody at a coffee shop. I was able to impart care or investment or wisdom. Or my wife and I had a contentious moment, but I was able to relax and sort of provide, a godly type of leadership and not explode. It's about these little moments. And I think it's part of what's gotten lost in today's world, because a lot of life was like that back in the day, and it comes back to honoring how humans have evolved or been created over these eons of times, hundreds and thousands of years of processes that eventually led to how we are today. And for the most part of humanity, what you had was today. Obviously,
Yeah.
you guys
Yeah.
you guys up north had winter, so you needed to figure out how to get through the winter. But for the most part, you had today, and you had these very short, compact time spans to worry about. And if you are able to bring life down to that and you understand peace and fulfillment, then mentally I'm healthy, because I get to the end of the day and I'm okay and I'm happy with myself and I feel I did well. And I go to bed and I feel, okay, today was a good day.
Mm.
Tomorrow when I get up, I'm going to try it again. The moment I go to next year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, it falls apart for me. And I suspect I'm not alone in that, because I think some of what I'm dealing with is human. It's not Schalk. And I think it's something that we see as well. People need to try and bring it back in. My question to you is, did you have a good day? Did you work hard? Did you work well? Were you able to invest in part in somebody today? Were you able to be a good person or a decent person? Were you there when your brothers or your family of choice needed you? Were you there? Those are the things that matter. And then tomorrow when you get up, you need to do that again. And I think there's something, I try to disconnect myself from those long-term issues because they're not good for my mental health. And I just try and bring it in. And with that saying, I don't always have a plan anymore. I used to have plans when I was younger. I believe in the principle of direction. I
Mm.
make sure that I'm headed in the correct direction. And every day I take another step or two in the direction. I've got a funny story from the COVID year. My wife and I, up until that year, we used to do the December, let's do our yearly planning thing. And that December of 2019, I just didn't feel it. And she was pressuring me, we need to do it. And I just didn't feel it, man. I just didn't have any inspiration for the year. And she was getting really, really angry at me because she felt I was being lazy and it's holiday and I wasn't list for the serious side. And it wasn't what it was. So I went and prayed about it. as I'm praying, God reminds me of a scripture, and I page through to James, and it literally says this. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it says, "Don't be arrogant and say that next year you will go here or do this or this, because you don't know. Rather say God willing." Now we go back to the dining room table because we're going to sort out the year planning, and I put this thing down. I tell my wife, "This is what I've got. I don't have anything. I'm sorry." And she was angry, and she took her stuff and she went and threw it on the desk, and she, had a big fit about me not wanting to do the year planning, but I just didn't have anything to do. And then COVID hit. Okay. And if we planned anything in December, it wouldn't have happened. Because it was not what our lives were like. The things that we would have planned would have been broken down by the lockdown. And it was an interesting thing for me to experience. I still tease my pastor buddies about it, because all of them had a word of God that this year they're going to do this or this, and none of them did it. And so I told them, "You heard wrong. You said you heard from God, but you didn't." And they get very, very angry at me. But it's the truth. They say they heard, but they didn't hear, because it was COVID and they didn't do anything they said they were going to do. So not all of them, most of them. But all of a sudden, this thing just comes and disrupts everything. And that for me was a big part of coming to terms of the fact that in today's world and life, we don't know anymore. And if we're going to try and control that, it's going to break us apart, because it's not possible anymore. And I needed to figure out how to reorient my life. And my two things that I had to do is I had to bring the time spans in and say, bring it closer. Have a good day today. End your day, sleep well, get up tomorrow, do the same. And then make sure you know which direction you're heading in. And every single day you take another step or two in that direction, because that's what's going to give you the fulfillment. That's been working for me. That sort of keeps me sane at this stage. And honest to God, where I see my brothers struggle, it's when they're trying over the big time spans and trying to control those big pictures.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was an unsolicited lesson.
Well, you mentioned, basically facing your own mortality, and we all have to do that at one point in time. I had that when I was younger, when I was a teenager. That was like, I would lay awake at night when first time, I realized I'm going to die. And it's a very, very scary feeling. And I remember the existential fear that would hit me. And every now and then it still happens. But now, with experience and intellect, you can say that, look, this is going to happen to everybody. So, you're going to have to accept this. And then that shouldn't stop you from living your life. It could be, I could drop that right now from an aneurysm as I'm talking to you, and that would be it. And nothing I can do about that. But that shouldn't stop you from trying to live the life as best you can. But on the other hand, there's what is it? Oscar Wilde, I think, wrote it like, "Do not go gentle into that night. Do not go into gentle into that good night." Or I'm really bad at remembering poetry, so basically it was a poem that he wrote for his father who was dying. It's like, don't just go, just fight. And I think that's worth thinking about as well, as like that we're all gonna die, but you can fight for your life right now. You can fight for things you want to achieve, you want to do, and so on. And then the other one I was thinking about, as you just said that, because I recently shared it online, is I very much recommend everybody watch the first Blade Runner movie, not the remake, but the first one. It's dated, but it's still an extremely good movie, in which it's basically a guy is a cop, and his job is tracking down androids that are basically, they have an expiration date and they need to be controlled or put to death and so on, because they look like humans, but they're machines. And there is one of them played by an excellent role by Rutger Hauer. And he gives this monologue at the end, and it's called Tears in Rain, and it's, in my opinion, the best freaking monologue ever on a screen.
I agree.
And he basically he reflects on his life, and he says, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe," and he mentions a few of his space travels and war and so on. And then he's like, all these memories will be gone. It's time to die. And I think that is a tragedy of human life. There's an absurdity to human life, which is difficult to accept. And but I think it's necessary to accept that no matter what you do, and the best possible explanation I can give of that is there's a picture taken from the planet Mars of the planet Earth. And it basically says like, okay, that little dot right there, everybody you ever loved, you've ever feared, every tyrant, every saint, everybody is right there. Throughout history, they're all gone. Those who are there now on that little spot right there. So if you look at the cosmic scale, and for that I would recommend people reading. I read the trilogy of the Three-Body Problem, which is a science fiction novel. Hard science fiction, very difficult to read through because of all the science and pseudoscience that is in there. But it is basically about how minute we are in the big universe that we live in, and how in many ways irrelevant the human life is. And if you can accept that, put it in the way that one of my clients put it, is that his dad told him, like, what we are, our lives, is just not even a blip on the eternity that is time. We're not even a grain of sand. This is just like this minuscule thing in the enormity, the vastness of space and time. And accepting that is very difficult. But if you don't, well, it's going to come back in the butt later in life, obviously, when it becomes clear. I'm 51, so I have more time behind me than I have in front of me. So, and as I get older, my priorities have changed dramatically. And I know now more like, okay, the end is going to come sooner rather than later. Okay, well, there's nothing I can do about that. There's upsides. I won't have pain anymore. So that's good. That's going to be good. But the main thing is you have to accept it and find some way of living with it. If you can't make peace with it, you have to find a way to live with it.
Not just live with it, but to try and flourish within that.
Yeah,
I think that's what I'm learning. The art of life is to live within the dichotomy of this cosmic irrelevance of a human life versus this need for meaning in your day-to-day experience. That's the art, because you can't, it's not the one or the other. It's about trying to figure out how do we marry those two. Because if you just face with this irrelevance, that's the thing for me that mentally just brings me into a very dark place, and I needed to figure out, okay, but how do I live? How do I find meaning with that knowledge? And on a long time span or time scale, I can't find meaning. There's no meaning. It's a blip. It's like you say, it's irrelevant. But in a day-to-day time span, in what I do today, I can find meaning. And it's about finding that balance. I've put a lot of thought into two themes that conjoin with what we're discussing now. The one is this idea of stewardship, and the other one is the idea of opportunity. And part of my spiral sort of into this very dark place is I would tell myself there's no purpose to any of this. There's what's the purpose? What's the purpose of my life? So this word purpose for me is very much tied into my spiral out of control. And I had to figure out how do I reframe my thinking about life and take away this idea of purpose. And so something that I've been telling myself for a while now, and a lot of my Christian buddies struggle with this idea because, in the faith life, I believe we misunderstand some of the nuances around purpose, and we just go and say there's a purpose of your life, and it's a very glib statement, because it again, for those that really think about it, it takes you in the wrong direction. And so every time I ask myself what's the purpose, then I tell myself there's no purpose to life. And some of my Christian buddies feel I can't love Jesus and do my thing and say there's no purpose to life, whereas I found peace with that. So I tell myself there's no purpose to life. All I have is opportunity. That's it. And I don't have to do anything today, but I can choose to do certain things today. And for me, the freedom has come in discovering that reality. And where the stewardship ties in with the opportunity. It's to say that for whatever reason, I am able to work today. For whatever reason, I'm able to write. For whatever reason, I've got 3 hours today in which I can draw. For whatever reason, I'm meeting face to face with Wim or with my wife, for whatever reason. Just that fact means that I've got opportunity. I've got the ability to choose how am I going to conduct myself towards this opportunity. And I can be a dick, I can be lazy, I can be difficult, or I can be the type of guy that really works hard, that thinks and is intelligent and works with his intelligence about his work. I can listen to what Wim is saying, whoever I'm sitting with, what they're saying. I can try and understand. I can see whether there's any way I can add value to their lives. I can choose these things. And in choosing them and in executing on them, I'm starting to find meaning. And so it's got nothing to do with purpose. It's got to do with stewardship. It's got to do with opportunity. It's got to do with the fact that for whatever reason, I'm here now and I'm faced with this situation, and I can decide what do I want to do with this. And I can really give it my all and give it my best. Sometimes I realize I don't have the capacity to do so, and then I need to figure out why. Maybe there's trauma, maybe I'm tired, maybe whatever. And I need to deal with that stuff so that I can be the type of guy that next time I'm faced with this, I can bring something or do something of value within this environment. And that's helping me to find much more meaning in my life. And it's also helping me to lock it into the moment. So it takes me away from those big sort of long time span questions. And here's the beauty of it. If I do this in the correct direction, I will be influencing the long-term things in any case, without even having to give them any thought or having to worry about them. Just about being in the moment and figuring out how do I contribute within the moment. And I've got 3 guiding principles in terms of what I try and achieve. It's based on a scripture in the Bible that says the kingdom of God is not about this and this and this, but it's a question of righteousness, peace, and joy. And righteousness is about what's right, and so when I'm faced with this thing, whether it's an intervention, whether it's sitting with a friend, whether it's work, whatever, those are the things that I try and put out. And if I'm able to put something of righteousness into the world, I'm able to fix something or help somebody or grab a guy and put him away, whatever, if I'm able to bring peace to this individual or bring peace between these 2 individuals, or if I'm able to make this person laugh or take a load off their shoulder, meaning I've brought joy, then something inside me just stands up and says, that was good, And I think that's a very human thing that we don't always understand, that we can get fulfillment by putting these things into the world, by putting them into the situations that we find. And that's why I'm calling it opportunity. So I'm at a place in life where I've very much moved away from this idea of things having purpose. And what I try and see is the situation that I'm faced with now. I try and see it as an opportunity, and I try and be mindful about what is it that I'm putting in there or out there. And the return is something on my inside says, well done, not from a cocky place or an arrogant place, from a very healthy sense of fulfillment place.
Yeah.
And that's doing my mental health a lot of good. Yeah.
There's a really good documentary about Danny Trejo, the actor, who's been, in 50,000 movies. And I mean, he was a wild man when he was young. He was a criminal. He went to, I think it's San Quentin prison I mean, he did hard time and so on. And there's this one point in which he says that, you know, he woke up and he was, you know, he'd been drunk and stoned and high and everything, and he wakes up in his car. And there's bullet holes in the car, and you know, he said I would go out with a hand grenade and all that kind of crazy stuff. And at one point, he says that, you know, every good thing in his life came from helping others.
Mm.
And he repeats that, and he does, you know, public speaking for youth that are at risk, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And he says that was the key. He says, you know, I'm this big tough guy and this and that, but every single good thing I ever got in my life is thanks to helping other people. There's a lot of fulfillment there. There's a lot of purpose. Helping others doesn't have to be high profile. There's a lot of people who are actually very quiet about the, you know, let's call it good deeds that they do for others, or helping others, or funding NGOs.
Weirdly enough.
Yeah. Because it's not about you, and just like, you know, that this makes a difference in somebody else's life. I talked about this with my girlfriend a while ago, and it's like the most fun I would have if I were a millionaire, trillionaire, billionaire, whatever, is I would have the most fulfillment of being able to, you know about people who are having a hard time, and you just drop an envelope with a bunch of money in the mailbox, and like, you know, you need this for that. Now you can take care of it and stop worrying about it. And nobody needs to know. There's people who do that kind of stuff, like a Secret Santa kind of thing, like with Christmas coming about. There's apparently this really rich guy who contacts the police, and like, okay, you guys know who's in trouble, who needs help, this and that, and like this guy, that lady over there, that single mom, and they just step up, and like, they don't need recognition, nobody needs to know. It's just that you're in a position to help, and you do so.
Yeah, and maybe I would venture to speak from a place of caring, but possibly tread on toes, if I can do that. I think it's a convoluted topic, so I just want to sort of build it a little bit. But let's put the sense of calling to protect, the healthy sense of calling to protect as men. Let's put that aside just for now. A large part of my involvement in the life, in violence, I don't think I was ever a tough guy, because it's not my personality, but I was a hard man, and I'm still a hard man. And I try and soften it up, because it's not always good for, you know, for the women, and sometimes it climbs out when it shouldn't climb out. Like my wife, it wasn't a good experience for the other day. She did the tiniest of things. We were sitting in the car, and she was talking to me, but the sun was in her eyes, and she took my head. She just moved my head to the side. And this is 2-3 weeks ago. So it's me as a fairly mature, healthy, adjusted person. And I'm immediately a switch flicked, and I told her, you don't do that again. I've told you before, you don't touch my head and move my head, you know. And it was the side that she knows, you know, she keeps quiet, you know, and I could see the fear and the sadness in her eyes. And unfortunately, that side is still there, you know, and I try not to be that guy, but it's there, is what it is. But what I want to get to, a lot of us got involved with the life and being tough guys, and the combatives and the knives and the guns, because of damage that we sustained when we were younger, you know, because of trauma, because of the fact that we had to, you know. For some of us, it was self-protection. For some of us, it was insecurity that drove us to this need to be something other than which we were. And for a very long time, and I know since when, 2017, I had a mental breakdown, and I had to go for therapy. We might have spoken about it in the past. Just fell apart completely. And there, for the first time, I realized just how deep the sort of the trauma goes, and I could connect the dots for why I took this path that I took in life. And I know today that apart from certain events, I wouldn't have gone that route, you know. So I know the tremendous impact that trauma at an early age has on us, and the fact that it sets us on a life path. And for some of your listeners, you know, maybe I just want to say, we don't have to be the tough guy, you know. We can be protectors, you know. We can be healthy men that want to protect and care. That's fine. That's a good thing. But if there's stuff that's out of place and we need to deal with it, then I want to encourage the guys to deal with it, you know, and don't stay stuck in this tough guy facade and way of life because you're hurting on the inside and because there's stuff you need to deal with. You know, I just want to put that out there because there's not enough guys that say that. And I've looked guys in the eye and told them you need to deal with your stuff, and they get tremendously angry at me. And then later they're like, okay, no, you were right. But I just feel like saying that, man. And I think there's a lot of guys like me and you know, that come out of backgrounds like that and that have found some healing and that have been able to work through our stuff, and we're better off for it. But unfortunately, also there's a lot of guys that are stuck in, you know, in violence and in glorifying violence and following violence and making violence cool and trendy because because they're hurting on the inside, you know, because there's damage. And, you know, maybe I just want to say, you know, if there's somebody listening to this that's there, you need to deal with your stuff. You know, it's not a good place to be, and it's not a good. I don't want to be that guy anymore. I mean, I'm sure you know what I mean when I say that. I don't want to be that guy anymore. Maybe I never wanted to be that guy, but life dealt me some cards and I had to play them. But I just really don't want to be that guy anymore. And maybe it's just necessary to say it, you know, that it's okay not to want to be that guy anymore. Yeah, it's just my.
I think that's a great place to end the first part of our talk and move it over to the Patreon part, because I've got a fair amount of questions of our patrons we can get to. We didn't get to any of the things we were basically planning on talking about, like your work with the police that you can talk about a little bit more now that you're retired. We'll have to do that another time. Also, you know, you're writing your novels, the new novels coming out. It's going to be a few months, if I'm not mistaken, like early next year, I think.
It's 1st December. Is the Hard Skyfire one. Let's not talk about the first two novels, because once I'm done with the first with this one, I basically only now feel like I found myself, and style-wise and technically, meaning I've been doing a lot of work on the craft, and I feel, okay, now I'm writing decent stuff at last. Okay. So it was good to write those first two books, but I want to rewrite them. I want to completely overhaul them. So I actually pulled the one off the shelves, and early September, I'm going to pull them both off the shelves, and I'm going to redo them, and then I'll relaunch them next year. So let's not even.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share it in the show notes, but where can people follow you to get updates on all that?
I think my author, I've got an author page on Facebook and an author profile on Instagram. So it's basically Schalk Holloway Author. So either facebook.com/Schalk Holloway Author or Instagram.com/Schalk Holloway Author.
All right. Okay. Well, Schalk, thank you very much for taking the time. For the folks listening, we are going to hop on over to the Patreon, where I have a bunch of questions. That's a cool part about my Patreon. If you join at I think it's a $5 mark, you can ask questions for my guests, and they then answer them for you. And typically the bonus part is usually my favorite. Not that this was bad or anything, but just that they ask questions that I never think about. Some of them are out of the box, and others like, yeah, I really want to know that too. All right. So folks, we are going to head on over there. All the links will be in the show notes, stuff that we mentioned, and the link to the bonus part as well. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Cheers, guys.